We've all lived by the sea for so long and looked at the sea, but we've never been on the sea. You know, not very many of us are sailors or anything. So it's just like getting out and looking back at the town from that perspective is wonderful. The rowing, the teamwork, the togetherness, the excitement of being on the water, the wildlife that you can see, it's fantastic.
I don't know if it just attracts like a really nice bunch of folk, but you know, everyone's really nice and you know, everyone's always welcome, whatever age and stage you're at. You know, if you can get your leg over the gunnel, you can row, you know, basically.
But this was something really quite extraordinary and was something that started in Scotland and it's now global. And that's very exciting. But you know, we need to trace the histories and we need to trace them as they are in the moment that are complicated, so it doesn't get retold and certain people and things get left out.
I would imagine it must be bigger now than the Cornish kegs. And that was the Holy Grail. So anything now is bonus.
I'm Alec Jordan. I make the kits for the boats. We was one of the original people who were involved with it and brought the idea to the Scottish Fisheries Museum, who gave us the backing to start the St Ayles skiff in 2009.
I mean, I've always been into boat building. I've been involved with the sea ever since I was at the school. I had my own boat. I've had about 14 or 15 boats, one kind or another. So it's all quite natural to me. Alec, he was enthusing about how the miners used to race boats after the war, and he wanted to build one.
When I moved to East Weems in 2005, I joined the local boat club, and the folk there showed me these pictures of the old miners' regattas where they built their own boats from timber. They would race them in the gala weeks, and there was big money apparently bet on the results. It became a very, very big thing, and the races were down the Fife Coalfield, the East Fife Coalfield. So it's a long tradition which sadly died out. I found out about it and I thought this actually could be a good idea if I could get all the villages around Fife to build their own boats. And that was really the limit of my ambitions at that time.
Alec's enthusiasm was there, which it rubbed off on me, and I saw that it was a good idea and helped it along with the help of the museum.
I went to the museum, Anstruther. David Todd spent a couple of hours showing me all around the museum, and I was astonished at what they have there. And he'd sent me photographs of the Fair Isle skiffs that they have there, and that was the starting point, really. And of course, I had no idea, none of us had any idea what it was going to lead to.
They commissioned Ian Outred to design the boat based on the Fair Isle skiff, which is a fantastic sea boat, so we thought we'll use that. It's a beautiful boat to look at. Ian used data which was there and designed the boat for plywood construction. I turned it into a kit. We built the first boat, the prototype, and the rest is history.
The name, I think, personally, is perfect for the boat. It's very much to do, embedded in the museum, because St Ayles was a monk in the 7th century. There was a chapel built here in about the 15th century in his memory, and the museum is on that site of where that chapel was. And it was built for the fishermen and the people that were on the sea, where they could go and say thanks, I suppose, to God for bringing them back home. So it was fabulous that the St Ayles, our St Ayles, was built here on that, you know, memory.
The very first one, we have that here. That was Mark I, there's a Mark II, and every other boat is a Mark III. The prototype, at the end of the day, after we're finished with it, it's got to come back into the museum as a museum piece. But it's not ready for that yet.
Only very minor change which you couldn't see even. I thought the boat looked a wee bit down by the stern, especially if they have a heavier cox. And So I just fattened up the lines aft, a little more buoyancy aft. That was all. So I didn't want too much stability, because if the boat's too stable, it rolls with the waves this way and that. But Alec wanted initial stability so that you could stand on the gunwale, whereas I was accustomed to, like the little Norwegian boats, you leap aboard the boat. You do not stand on the gunwale because you'll get wet.
We decided, once we had this boat, we had to set a club up. And David Todd obviously was involved in that. And David, being David, told me, "You will be captain." And mainly because I had some knowledge of the sea. So he was brilliant. He supported, you know, me, just help getting the club set up. And it wasn't long before, you know, there was plenty of other people there to support me. But yes, it was David that was instrumental in that.
I'm Robbie Whiteman. I was the first convener of the SCRA. I called the first meeting, really, which established the SCRA. I've always been at the sea, and I always wanted to see whether we could have more rowing as part of the sport down here at North Berwick, because there was too much motorised activity on the sea, and it would be nice to bring a bit more of a balance, more in tune with nature. I organised traditional boat musters here at North Berwick, so I was just getting together folk that sailed nice old boats, and in those traditional boat musters I started organising a rowing race. The second year I did that, there's a fella came down called Charlie who'd built his own boat. I was chatting to him afterwards about how we could maybe develop the rowing and whether we could have a class of rowing boats that could be used all around Scotland. A few weeks later, maybe 3 or 4 weeks later, I got a phone call from Charlie saying, "Robbie, you won't believe this. There's people in Fife who are talking about the same sort of things that you're talking about." So Charlie put me in touch with Alec Jordan and David Todd of the Scottish Fisheries Museum. I went across and met them a few days later, and that was when Fife Coastal Rowing Project became the Scottish Coastal Rowing Project.
I do think if we don't do this now, this history will be lost, and it'll only be told through the lens of something further down the line, maybe when we have an Olympic sport that is coastal rowing, and then somebody will write some unilinear history. And what will be missed out is all those nitty-gritties, all the time that somebody really drove you mad, right? But you didn't argue with them because they were in your boat, you know, or the way your confidence grew, the way the first time you coxed and how that felt. You forget once you've been coxing for 4 years what it feels like for somebody to do that for the first time. So I think those stories are really important as well.
Our first boat, we had 2 girls in the tea room. Once they had a shot, they're the biggest exponents of the game now.
Natalie and I worked in the Scottish Fisheries Museum in Anstruther, and by chance we got approached by Alec Jordan, who had said that he'd built this boat and did we fancy having a row? So we were like, yeah, okay. I think I was on shift at the time, so I thought, yeah, sure, go for a wee skiff. So we went out on the boat, having never rowed before. Ever, yeah. And I think he framed it like they were doing a regatta and they were looking for interest and did we fancy having a shot? At that point there was like no structure, there was no club.
I went out initially and I was awful, absolutely awful. I described it as I was doing back rowing for days. Like I couldn't do it, I couldn't get the hang of it. I'm not really that sort of person. Hand-eye coordination, none of that. I was awful at it and I thought, I don't know, what am I doing here? This isn't for me.
And I remember you saying to me, like, I'm going to go out, this was the 3rd time you'd been out, and you're like, if I don't get it this time, like, that's it. I'm not doing it. Like, and then the 3rd time it was just like, click. Oh my God, I could do it.
So, and then we were hooked, I guess.
I was anticipating that it would be young men would be most interested in doing it, and I envisaged that it was actually going to be something like the Highland Games semi-professional circuit, that there would be races in all the wee villages and it would be the young men out there, again with purses, you know, money prizes for it like you get in the Highland Games, maybe a trophy as well. That has not happened.
The early days were just such good fun. It was a lot of chaos because none of us really knew what we were doing or how to row. We were lucky in that we had Alec there to teach us, and we had our first regatta here with 6 boats from, you know, round Scotland. I do remember that the North Berwick boat still had its paint drying when it arrived.
In the early days when we went to regattas, the prizes, the medals, were quite often made from the local material. So we've had medals that are on mussel shells, we've had medals on pieces of slate, we've had medals that have been knitted, we've had medals that have been made from clay, and all sorts of things, glass, you know, things that reflected the community that event was taking place in.
SCRA did a survey of clubs, and the biggest age groups are the 40s and 50s. The sliding seat rowing community, the Olympic rowers, they're looking for young people in their 20s, but we're working with a demographic that often has never done any sport before, never done any competitive sport, and slightly more than 50% women. It's fantastic. I think the health, you know, the sort of cumulative health benefits of this must be amazing.
I think we brought a bit of glamour to Scottish coastal rowing. Like, folk our age were going to like nightclubs and all that sort of thing. So we would, like, our highlight of the weekend was you'd go to a regatta, like row really hard, and then you would usually end up at some like party. They do like a lot of Kayleys and things.
Yep.
So Natalie and I were always making the
we
effort.
take our like best outfits, best shoes, and go and have a good time. We did. We'd like go to campsites. We'd have like super high heels and stuff. Why did we do that?
I don't know. And then also you had like 4 mums with you, so you got like looked after. You got, you know, bacon roll in the morning, and it was great. Help you with your airbed if you were camping and all that sort of thing.
There's a famous story about the first World Championship we held, and somebody was walking along the street behind the beach in Ullapool, and there was this little girl right down at the water's edge shouting, "Go, Granny, go!" which sort of emphasises how, you know, that was all ages and everybody. Yeah, very inclusive.
I only started rowing about 2 years ago, so I would be probably 85, 86 before I started. I felt that I was needing more exercise. I only do 2 keep fit classes where I'm responsible for taking it. Do some bell ringing and occasionally do some yoga. But apart from that, I'm not really involved much in anything physical. I'm quite proud that I have been allowed to enter the community of rowing in the social side. If I achieve something competitively, why, so all to the good.
I don't mind saying that. I'm 66 now, and I'm still competing in a sport at quite high levels. I just love it. It keeps me so fit. I meet people. There's hardly a place I go now in Scotland where there isn't a skiff that I can just mosey down and have a chat to people. It's really opened up, you know, a lot of avenues for me.
What other sport can you excel at when you're in your late 40s, 50s? You know, there's no other sport that you can just pick up and then go to a world championship and compete in.
And I knew I'd missed rowing, but when I got in that boat 3 weeks after Isla was born, I was just like, oh. It was a beautiful day in Unstruther, sun was shining, you know, sandy beach, beautiful seas, and I was just like, oh, I can't believe how much I've missed this. And it'd only been a few months, but I hadn't been rowing, and I was absolutely gasping to be back. And I had the worlds in mind. I knew I'd have maybe, well, she's 14 weeks now, and I thought, I think it is possible, but nobody knows. Nobody knows what it's like to come back after having a baby. But here I am. I'm competing in 2 races. We'll see how it goes.
And I think one of the things that coastal rowing seems to do is it seems to keep people of all ages rowing, and it might be because when you're in a boat, everything's kind of equal. You need everybody's skills, whereas if you were going to run on a cycle with somebody, you'd feel like you're waiting on them, but if you're in the boat, you're all rowing together. And I think because there's such a steep learning curve when you start rowing as well, people really feeling an increase in their self-esteem as part of the skills that they developed, and then that feeling of self-worth from being wanted and valued, whether that's as a cox or a team member across the age ranges. So I think that's quite important when you get to later stages of life, to be able to reflect and feel quite positive about the life you've had.
I used to sail, but now I row, and sailing is quite different from rowing. Sailing is more solitary and also can be quite cold in Scotland. You know, if you go rowing, you're never cold. We row all winter. Sailors, they think, oh, that looks like hard work. It looks unpleasant to them and a bit kind of like a galley slave. But to us, it's different. You get into a different frame of mind. You can get into a kind of Zen state. You're not having to think about steering. You can just get into the rhythm of it. I think it's great.
What we wanted to do was to have a community build. I'd looked when I was thinking about this at the other boats which were around in coastal rowing, and really that's the Cornish pilot gig, the Celtic longboats, and then there's a couple of other small classes around. Now with the Cornish pilot gig, they cannot be built by a community group. You need to be a properly qualified boat builder to do it. And to actually get the Cornish pilot gig on the water, fully campaignable, will cost well over £30,000.
We were reckoning at the start that we could turn out a boat for 3,000. It was achievable for anybody.
It's about twice as easy to build as a traditional clinker boat. So the difficult bit about building a traditional clinker boat is that you have to find the shape of the planks. The difficult bit isn't putting the planks together. The difficult bit is establishing the shape of the planks. But with the kit, they all come ready cut. It's not as easy as putting a flat pack wardrobe together, but it's certainly a lot easier than building a traditional boat from scratch.
And what I remember was that the boat kit itself came before the actual instructions. So it was quite overwhelming seeing all these pieces and thinking, how does this fit together? It was a real puzzle at the start. And actually the formal detailed instructions were a later addition, and they came about because one of the first clubs to build their boat documented it at the same time, and that's where the instruction book that we still rely on today was written. I think there was something really special and really important about the first boats that were built, because the first 6 communities, obviously there was friendly competition because we all wanted to get our boats on the water and be the first. But what went on was like a lot of information sharing, there was lots of tool sharing, there was also a lot of kind of collective problem solving, and I really believe that is what sort of put in place the ethos for coastal rowing, about communities coming together and communities working and just general overall goodwill, and I think that's how we got Scottish coastal rowing to the place that it is today.
A fisherman can look at a boat and he'll see a boat that looks like a boat, and it has very fine lines, and you see when they're on the water, the way the water parts away from it, they were well designed. When I was building one of my boats for fishing, and that was just when I was moving off from wooden boats into a steel boat, steel trawler, and an old fisherman came along and he stopped me and he says, Archie, he says, tell me you're building a new boat and she's steel. I says, yes. Because the old boys didn't like steel boats. The wood boats is all crafted by the eye. There wasn't a designer, they were crafted by the eye. He says, well, make sure you have something to look at. You're going to spend half your life in that boat. He says, so you better have something to look at. So it's like the skiffs, we've got something to look at. You'll never get a better boat than that for what we're trying to do.
I've been very aware for a long time, right from the beginning, of I was selling plans, my own designs, to people many of them never built a boat before. In the beginning, I didn't have enough practical experience actually building the boat myself, which in a way was an advantage because I was very aware of, right from the very start, having to think stop and think about every single step right along the way. And so I was thinking more like an inexperienced boat builder in a way, whereas a very experienced boat builder would just charge through the initial stages without having to think too much.
It's very enjoyable and satisfying to be able to make things that you've never made before. And that includes the making of a club as well as the making of a boat. And I don't know which is the most satisfying.
What happens is someone in a community, and it's usually small communities, says, wouldn't it be great if we did this? And people say, yes, it would be. And then often they think there's nobody around with the skills to do it, but there's usually some old guy somewhere, not always old and not always guys, but often some old guy somewhere actually knows how to do this. And they kind of come out of retirement and a little nucleus works away in some obscure shed, and gradually the word comes around that there's a boat being built and people kind of have a look, and if it's being run with a view to community publicity, then the people know about it and they get excited when it reaches a certain stage. The boat's built upside down. There's a moment when it has to be lifted off its moulds and turned the right way up, and you can do it with about 4 people. It's very light. But if you say, oh, we need 40 people to do this and make a big party of it, you know, and have food and stuff, then people begin to realize they have a boat. And we went to Koya, which is a neighboring community, and we went to their turnover, which they had made really social. And a little boy came up to me and said, who are you? And I said, oh, I'm Topher, and we've come over from, where have you come from? Ullapool. Oh, and he opened his little anorak like this, and he was trying to hide the boat from us. You know, he didn't want us to see their beautiful and amazing boat in case we stole their secrets. And I thought, this little boy who's only like 6, he really thinks he owns this boat.
Robbie Whiteman phoned me up from North Berwick to say there's a skiff coming to North Berwick to let us see what it looks like, because we're thinking about starting rowing clubs around Scotland. I says, I could get the monies to buy the moulds for this, and I think I have 2 or 3 friends that would probably build this boat. The first night we got 39 people at our meeting, and Robbie says, I've never seen that before. It says, for a meeting to be called and you get 39 people. The people said, yes, we'll support you. So that is actually boat number 1. The fishermen always, in Cockenzie boat scene, we always sing a song, the Boaty Rouse. So while we're all gathered together, we said, what we're going to call this boat? I said, we'll call it the Boaty Rouse.
I crossed my line in Largo Bay, and fishes I caught 9. There were 3 to roast, and 3 to boil, and 3 to bake the line. The boaty rouse, the boaty rouse, the boaty rouse fu will, and MacCulloch attend the boats, the marlin and the creel. When Sandy Jock and Janet they are up and gotten lear, they'll help to guard the boaty row and lichten all her care. The boaty rouse, the boaty rouse, the boaty rouse fu will, and MacCulloch attend the boat, the marlin and the creel.
While we were building, Ullapool was building, Clyde was building, Anstruther and North Berwick was building, so there was a bit of a race on to try and get the first boat, so we did manage it. And funnily enough, the people that came to that first meeting, they are still the backbone of this club. It's a thing that I'm really proud of. I'm proud of the club. That's my take on the rowing skiffs, and look, I wouldn't change it.
A friend of mine, a boat builder in Ullapool, noticed that this was happening, that there were skiffs being made, and he thought it'd be a great idea if 8 of us got together and chipped in 250 quid and built a skiff. And I used to build boats for a living, and he was building boats for a living, and there was another guy who was interested in boat building, and there was the local doctor, and anyway, we got 8 people together and we chipped the money in, and we found a cowshed to build it in, and it was a fun thing to do over the winter, and we were all quite excited, and we thought that having 8 people to row a boat with 4 oars, that would be plenty. We didn't realise that you need about 40 people to row a boat like this, because you can form crews and all go out. So anyway, that was the start of it.
I did expect, if we enabled communities to do this, I did expect that it would go. I mean, I think what I'm proud of is the community involvement, the fact that these clubs have become a real mainstay of their own communities. They have enabled people within their towns to get out on the water and metaphorically as well as physically look at their community in a new way. We've facilitated it by putting in places the rules, but it's the communities that have achieved that, and that's what makes me proud.
I think the first moment I realised that this is like massive is when we got beat. And I'm thinking like, we used to like dominate the field. We've been winning races for so long.
Yeah,
We had
for
this,
a long time.
Unbroken record, and then these clubs that we'd never heard of just turned up and were really good. And we're like, oh, who are you? And why are you beating us?
Put more of a competitive edge on it, whereas before it was more sort of a friendly, I would call it, and then you know, you would see your pals and then you'd have a race against them, and then it put this real competitive spin on it, and people started from that point taking it a lot more seriously.
And it got to the point where people weren't going to the pub the night before.
No.
You know, we were like, oh, we were still doing that. That's probably why we were getting beaten. I don't know. But oh no, early night tonight, big race tomorrow, and
then you knew then that was the
things
change.
started to get a bit more competitive, and we were getting beat. Nah, we weren't. Still managed, still the edge.
And then I noticed that Alex was starting to sell kits in the States and Australia and New Zealand. And I thought, pretty soon there's going to be a world championship. And I and the guy called Kevin Peach, who's the harbour master in Ullapool, he's been tremendously supportive. We both had the idea separately that we should have a world championship. So we put forward to the SCRA, which I'm on the committee of, the idea that we should run a world championship, and the reaction was, oh yeah, that's a great idea, but we should put it around all the clubs to see who wants to do it. You know, it shouldn't just go to you because you've asked. So that's fine. So we put together a proposal with photographs of Ullapool when the sun shines, and it was such a knockout proposal. We circulated it among the other clubs who wanted to do it, and they took one look at it and said, it's okay, Topher, you go for it. So we did, and we were so lucky. We had a fantastic week of weather, and the sun shone every day, and it was just like the pictures. It was perfect.
I've always been a boaty person, but a few years ago a shipwright said to me, oh, we've got a group of women in Franklin about to build a boat, and it's a women-only build. So yes, that'd be great, because there'll be no men telling you what to do. So that's, that's the issue. But we did have a shipwright that was guiding us. We did it all by hand, so we didn't use electric tools. So we learnt rabbiting, which is where we overlay the boards by hand. We had small planes that we used by hands. We did spoke shaves to do the curves in the boat. So yeah, we were pretty excited about it. And I think we started in April 2012 and finished in December. And there was 30 women, so we were pretty proud of ourselves. And so it was the first skiff in Tasmania. And it still wins more races than any other boat, and we think that's all the love and the skill that we put into the boat.
Very special. We were so proud at the end of it. When we had the launch day, it was like, don't touch it, don't scratch it. And now it's just a hard-working boat.
So I think as women, we've done everything else. We've had families, we've had careers, and there's probably some areas like woodwork that we haven't had that chance to really enjoy. And that was it. And we ended up being really good and detailed, and we worked in a really fine way with all the woodwork. So we were pretty proud of ourselves, really.
I put a poster up in the school saying suggestions for the school boat, suggestions for the names. And the only two suggestions were so rude that I'm not going to tell you what they were, but they were just not an option. Well, I'll tell you, but you have to filter it out, okay? One was long, hard and full of semen, and the other was the floater. So I don't want that quoted. So we had to invent a more decorous name, and we called it Coolmore, which is easy to pronounce and Gaelic, and it's the name of a local hill. What could possibly go wrong? And then I asked my colleague in the maths department who speaks Gaelic what Coolmore actually means. Well, he said it means big bottom.
One afternoon in the Jolly Fisherman pub in Craster, half a dozen of us decided we'll have a go at this. Our first problem, of course, was where on earth are we going to build a boat? This was in 2015. Methodist Chapel had just closed down, and some friends of ours had bought the chapel to convert into a house. So they said, well, while we're thinking about building it, converting it, you can use the chapel to build a boat. It was great. Perfect conditions to build a boat. But the only thing that we hadn't considered was getting the fully completed boat out of the chapel. We had to remove one of the chapel windows. So there was a great scene of the boat emerging out of the chapel windows, and there we had our Jolly Fisherman boat. One of the things was that we were looking around, of course, for spare timber to build the seats in the boat. One of our members, he said, oh, my granny's table will make a lovely cock's seat. So Granny Anderson's dining table is the cox's seat.
It's really brought our village together because we were a bit down at heel, we lost our village pub and there was nothing really to do. So I think especially, Koyak, who I used to row with, won the first World Championships, and there was only 300 people in that village and there was 30 rowers. I mean, that's just nuts, isn't it? There's, 1 in 10 of the population, and we're pretty good. We've got about 60 and I think we've got about 1,000 people living there. So just to bring a bit more life to the village, it's really important.
I'm terribly proud of the way it's all gone. It's just wonderful to see the way it's grown, and I hope it stays this kind of amateur, home-rolled, slightly rough at the edges, not professional, not big money, not Olympic, but genuinely community.
It was our first Port Edgar Open Day. The boat had only been launched about 2 or 3 weeks. So along comes a cheery looking chap on a bike, introduced himself as Andy Jarvis.
He loved the regattas. Andy would come out of the boat and walk along the beach. He didn't sit and relax like everyone else and get that breath back.
Andy made it known to everybody that he was available, and he was a very popular guy at all the regattas because if Andy was sitting for a moment, somebody from another club would come along and say, Andy, we need you for this race, would you come along? And yes, he'd jump in any boat that he could, and he just loved it.
So much so, the captain of Anstruther got in touch with me, and she told me, she says, we used to keep a seat in the boat for him. She says, because we knew Andy would be along.
He would have given his all, even against his own club, he would have given his all for the boat that he was in. Of course, Andy jumped in and out of everybody else's boats. They dedicated the race to the memory of Andy. The Andy race took place of what used to be the last race in most regattas, a pick and mix race. The friendly competition has been absolutely wonderful.
I thought it was quite an honour, really, to have this, because it's what Andy would have wanted. He would have thought the world of this.
I had not anticipated the pride which the communities were going to have in their boats. It's been absolutely fantastic. There are boats here today which were built 6, 7, 8 years ago, and they were beautifully done then, and they have been beautifully maintained. And it's that pride that this is our boat, we built it, and we're going to keep it good and maintain it. I think it's passing on to other people, to youngsters, maintain things and they stay around and they become loved and cherished.
I was talking to a friend this afternoon who told me about a guide who built 4 or 5 skiffs and donated them to local communities, and it didn't work because it's a free boat, you know, and it sounds wonderful, but they had nothing like the same involvement with the boat. The boat wasn't part of their lives as it is building the boat from the kit from scratch with your pals.
We've been approached at various times with people who want to build the kit, build the St Ayles skiff in wood and nails. We're quite happy for them to do that, but there's no way they'll be allowed to race them. Every boat that's raced must conform to all the rules. A lot of people's tried to change the rules, trying to speed the boat up and everything, but that it's pointless really. The boat is what it is. It's about the people. Could be a bathtub, and it's still about the people.
We have a really strong community anyway in Cromarty. It was always like a really good, vibrant place. Just over 750, I think, of a population. And we have 143 members in the club. And I always laugh because if you see a wee huddle on the corner of the street, you can guarantee they're probably talking about the oars or the weather conditions or anything skiffy, you know, like, oh, they're skiffers, they're chatting about the club, you know. It's unusual if we're not talking about rowing.
It's no secret that I have suffered from depression very, very badly. One of the areas which you've got is low self-worth. I can't do anything, I'm not good for anything. If you go out in a boat, a rowing boat, you're able to actually start working as a team very quickly and easily. You may not be brilliant, but it doesn't take long for 4 people to realise that when you all row together at the same time, the boat goes much better.
I think one of the things I like most, people often don't know much about people's wider lives. They don't know their surname, but they might know that David lost his wife. They don't know whether David was an architect or a teacher, a manual labourer, but they will know that he lost his wife, and they will know that they'll look out for him when he comes rowing. So it's that sort of embedded community and relationships that I think is probably quite unusual in our society today. But there's definitely something about that being on the coast and in the sea.
I care for my mum, she's got dementia, and for me it's just, that is my space, getting out onto the water and having that time away. It's kept me going, really.
One of the other things on the subject of health, people with disabilities are able to row in these boats and they compete on the same level as other people. North Berwick, for the first few years, their men's open stroke was actually registered blind. When he was ashore, he had to, in a strange port, he had to have somebody showing him around. Somebody out there rowing today at Skiffy Worlds who's a double amputee, and he is rowing not as a disabled person, he's rowing with everybody else in the same class.
I like the therapeutic side of it. When you're out in the water and you've got a great rhythm going on, and you get the fresh air, it's good for your head. You've got to concentrate on your stroke, but you know you could be anywhere in your head, you know, and I think it's good for the soul.
Julie and I were both physiotherapists, and we felt that what we could do to bring our expertise to the party would be to try and open access to people whose first thoughts about their own recreational time wouldn't be physical activity and wouldn't firstly be rowing.
It's really been a fairly sort of steep learning curve to try and encourage adaptive rowers with a wide variety of conditions to get into the boat.
I mean, everybody's got different abilities, you know. I'm not using the disability word, you know what I mean? There's always a way There was a saying, you know, never tell an amputee you can't. You know, and I think that goes for everybody. That, you know, it's nothing to do with my disability, it's about my head. You know, never say no, you can do anything you want.
There were no challenges that were insurmountable. It's about, you see the problem, you see where you are, and you work out a route to get from A to B. And that might be a route of attitude, it might be a route of equipment that's inappropriate, it might be a route dealing with modifications to a boat, it might be approaching the SCRA and saying, well, the rules of racing preclude adaptive rowers, and the SCRA said, right, any equipment rule is waived for an adaptive rower. You know, so that was a potential problem which all of a sudden went.
It makes you feel normal again. It's just like you're part of something and you can do something that everybody enjoys. You can join in.
It just means getting out and actually doing something with your life, you know, and enjoying the sport with other like-minded people.
A lot of communities find, because we're working rurally, that they get young people to row and then they disappear off to the cities to go to university and whatever else. They lose them for a few years, then they go away, start families, and then they maybe start to come back.
I started out as a rower, and I was a little shy young girl on this team of big burly men. And I would row and I'd hold my own, usually in the bow. And one day our coxswain didn't show up for the race, and I was an extra rower, so my coach said, yep, Emily, you're in, you're gonna coach them, you're gonna coxswain. And I was like, I can't do that, oh my gosh, this isn't good. And I got in the boat and I coxed them and we won. And I found my strength out of nowhere, and it was just this under pressure situation that brought out a new piece of me, and I found leadership and responsibility through it, and it taught me a lot and informed my whole life moving forward, I think.
What's good about the rowing for the young people is they're interested in the rowing, but it is more a social aspect for them. So a lot of our juniors stay within the club because they love going to regattas and speaking to people about the rowing and mixing in. It's not always that they're mixing in with other teenagers, because obviously there isn't a huge amount of juniors within coastal rowing just now, but it's the adults that sort of make it. We went over to Strangford, which is one of our favourite regattas to go over to, and everybody was just so welcoming. They were coming down with food for the juniors, they were pulling them all up to dance, and even when we get rained off, well, the event actually get rained off, all our tents flooded, we get taken in. This one of the ladies, Claire and Patrick from their club, took 18 of our kids into their house, so it really is a social aspect for it. That's why they all stay in the club, and rowing's just an added extra.
If I didn't have rowing, I never would have met so many people and had so many friends from like all over the country and from different countries.
I think it's really relaxing, especially when we're doing exams at school. That element to it that you're all a team and it's not one person can be so much better. No one's going to be the star, you know.
We actually have boat building as a timetable subject within our curriculum. All teenagers are building it, so it was a bonus that it floated.
About 6 years ago, I came over to Scotland, to the beautiful town of Ullapool, where the first worlds were. And Roy was there, but not only Roy, also somebody else. A beautiful girl laughing at me. With the Dutch, we won a few prizes, gold, silver, bronze. But as you know, there is one prize you can't win. You can only ask for. So Annette, I want to ask you, do you want to marry me?
Fairly early on, St Ayles skiffs started to get built in Australia, the Netherlands, Canada, United States. It became clear that we weren't just a Scottish association.
With the sport having grown as much as it has over this past 3 years, the number of clubs, and you can see here this week just the amount of new members and how this movement throughout the whole world has sort of expanded. It's just terribly exciting for us all.
10 years ago we started a rowing club in the Netherlands, in Woudrichem, and we rowed for 3 years, and then we discovered the St Ayles skiff, and we were very enthusiastic because it's a light boat, self-built, so we started to build 2 boats, and after 2 years we started rowing.
It's like a brotherhood. I've never seen so much goodwill in my life. Everyone wants to help, everyone wants to talk to you. We can't bring our boat, it's too expensive. They arranged for us to have a boat. They do everything in their power to have us here, and we're delighted to be here.
It's an honor. It's really nice to be able to represent our country. I don't feel separate from the population here. I feel very welcomed, and the other rowers and other clubs have been incredibly generous at bringing us into their group. I know we're pretty new here, we're the new kids, but you know, it's been a really nice integration into this crew.
The world side of it became bigger and bigger, and we were organising Skiffy Worlds. We really wanted these other countries to get the same level of maturity that we were achieving in Scotland. So in order to do that, the way to do that is to restructure so that they can hopefully get the same level of organisation within their country as we've now achieved in Scotland.
We had a really successful freshwater sprint, and when everyone went home, the SCRA committee and a few hangers-on were kind of left behind, and we were having a conversation about how much bigger coastal rowing could get in the next 10 years and how that phenomenon and how it had grown, all these kind of things. And I just made a chance comment about, you know, there's so many clubs now that will soon be able to row around Scotland. And that was the kind of start of a little conversation that began to sort of gather pace. Then, of course, Hannah and Andy Rendell, Secretary of SCRA, joined in the conversation and were saying, well, how would we manage getting around from here to here, and some of the more meaty and remote type areas. And then the next thing I knew it, Hannah and Andy were poring over sea charts and already plotting how this was going to happen. So that's my memories of it.
In March 2020, when COVID-19 pandemic started, obviously there was no rowing allowed in Scotland, so our 10 years became very, very different. We were off the water for around about a year. We got a small brief period in the middle where some areas of Scotland were allowed to row, but not all. And then we got rowing in full again in 2021. So our row around Scotland really suffered. A lot of our events all suffered, a lot of things was cancelled, and that continued into 2021 as well.
Together with lots of help from lots of other people. I was the co-coordinator of Row Around Scotland. We got funding from the Year of Coastal Waters, which is an Event Scotland funding, and also from Nature Scot to run a very exciting programme to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Scottish Coastal Rowing Association. And first of all, we had a virtual row around, which was an important way of getting the legacy of Scottish coastal rowing onto a website, so that everybody could see the history of the clubs and why they painted the colours, the skiffs, the colours they were, and why they were named what they were and where they rowed. But then 15 months later, we were able to start the real row around, and we did it with 2 different battens. So we couldn't start until June 2021 because of the pandemic stopping us from rowing. And then we squashed it all into a short period of 5 months, finished it at Loch Tummel in October 2021. And that was a great occasion where 5 people from the original 5 clubs of Scottish coastal rowing carried the baton and handed it on to some representatives of 3 new skiffs which had just launched in 2021. So all in all, we had 64 clubs involved in all sorts of different ways. We had over 1,200 rowers. We did 750 miles. But the other important thing was that we collected microplastic samples for the Scottish Association for Marine Science. And we got 56 samples collected from different places around the coast for them.
And I think that's a real benefit of Scottish coastal rowing, is that we can
we can muster that number of people and we can take on an exercise like that just in the course of our business. And obviously the data that we're going to gather from that is something that's going to be valuable not only now but in generations going forward.
So it was a very good way of keeping the coastal rowers on side during a very difficult period where there weren't very many regattas and there wasn't very much going on, and it linked a lot of coastal clubs up together all around the coast so that we had the sense of community in that.
So I don't think anybody would have ever imagined, looking back over the last sort of 10 years, what the sport became. I remember standing on the beach looking at a prototype skiff, wondering whether or not we're going to go and build it, and the things that I thought was going to happen with it, and it's nothing like that. It's grown hugely and way more than anybody could possibly have imagined. I don't think we would ever have thought that the pandemic was coming either, and what that's done to the skiffs. It's impacted on the events and the ability for everybody to go out and see each other. But what it's not done is it's not sort of stopped any of the clubs. A lot of them's still stuck together, which is what the skiffs is about. It's about more than just a boat.